Hearthstone is fundamentally broken right now, and I've talked to other creators, I've looked at the comments of my streams and my videos, I've looked at Twitter and Reddit, and I've looked at the Twitch viewership numbers overall, same with YouTube overall, and all of these things point towards there is a problem with Hearthstone. So what is that problem? Obviously, you guys can comment your thoughts down below, but the problem, in my opinion, is mostly just a lack of agency in the game and too much power creep. What do I mean by this? Well, agency is basically your ability to impact the game, especially in relation to what your opponent does. And right now, it feels like there's basically none. Hunter, Paladin, Mech Rogue, and Shadow Priest can all end games as early as turn 6, and then you have decks like Druid and Warlock that make you feel like games end as early as turn 5 or 6 if they have Nourish, if they have Symphony of Sins, or if Warlock can summon 2/4/7s on turn 4. There are a couple of decks that I actually don't have as much of a problem with, like Control Warrior, like Sith Mage, because those don't happen until around turn 9 or 10, so it gives you a little bit more time to actually outplay them. So I don't hate these kind of decks in general. In fact, I think having combos limits the power of control, and it has this whole like rock, paper, scissors element to it. I think combo decks and things like that are good. I just don't think they're good when they're this fast and aggro is this fast. How do you solve this problem? Well, first would be nerfs and buffs, but there are a couple of issues. One, if you nerf and buff cards, you inherently make a lot of people angry. Either you don't nerf and buff cards and you make people who dislike the meta upset, and then they might quit the game. Or you actually do nerf and buff cards, and let's say you nerf Control Warrior as an example, a deck that used to be at about a 52% win rate and has dropped down to 46% and sees very little play because they nerfed 2 cards, Sanitize and Craftsman's Hammer, which are like a rare and a common. This is about a 17,000 dust deck. Obviously, it's more expensive for me because I put in new legendaries, so maybe it's more like 12,000. But the point is, they lost 12,000 dust value and got maybe 400 dust in refund. If I am a free-to-play player that just put all of my dust into making this new Warrior deck because Warrior was finally good, or I put real money into the game, just for it to get nerfed about 2 weeks later, I would legitimately quit Hearthstone. It would feel so awful. And that's the other side of the coin, where the nerfs make people quit because their deck is now unplayable and they have no dust left over. The other thing is I think Blizzard just doesn't nerf the right cards a lot of the time. They nerf the right decks, but then they don't nerf the cards that make you say, oh damn, I just lost, right? Like when you're playing against Druid, yes, the Jailer was very powerful, and then the other card they nerfed was the Contaminated Lasher. But those weren't the cards that made me think like, man, I just fucking lost the game. No, the thing that made me think I lost the game was when they played Embrace of Nature and then like coined or used Innervate to get Nourish out on turn 4, or I guess turn 5, and then gained mana crystals and drew cards. Those cards are the problem. Also in Warlock, Forge of Wills into imposing Anubiseth, how often are you actually gonna be beating that? If you're playing in the mirror match, a lot of the time it's like, who can get this out first? Who has it on curve? And then again in Hunter, you have Celestial Shot into Eversong Portal, which isn't quite as bad, but it feels about as bad because the deck is so fast, getting all these stats out there out of nowhere can just end the game as early as turn 5. Like I've won games turn 5 by going turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. And just hitting in the face and maybe having like the weapon with the Starstrung Portal or whatever, or the Starstrung Bow. The point is, you need to nerf the cards that make you think, fuck man, this is what leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Those are the cards that need to be nerfed. And I feel like this goes back as far as like Bran from last year, where a lot of cards around Bran with good battle cries were nerfed. My argument was always, maybe it's not all like 20 of these battlecry minions. Maybe it's Bran, the center of it all, that makes all of these worse. But I feel like Blizzard has these favorite cards or certain things that because they're stubborn or whatever, just like don't want to nerf. They don't want to admit they were wrong about a certain card, so they're like, okay, no, Nourish isn't the problem. Guys, it was the Jailer the whole time. No, guys, Nourish isn't the problem. It's this new card that we just printed, the Contaminated Lasher. That was the problem. Meta's fixed. No, meta isn't fixed. Even after banning a card and nerfing Druid, it is still the best deck in the game right now. So those are the two problems with nerfing. My proposed solution, which would solve both of the issues, is a mass nerf across the board. You don't have to single out certain cards. You don't have to admit you are wrong about a certain card. Literally nerf like 30 to 40 cards. A lot of people will get a lot of dust refunds. The meta will be completely shaken up. There will be newer players who maybe get dust refunds from cards they weren't even playing, so now they can build decks they didn't actually know they could build before or weren't initially interested in. And it brings the power level of the game way down. And this, you could say, oh, resets happen every year, right? Like this is essentially what the start of a new year is supposed to be. Wrong. What happened last year was Festival of Legends, and that was, generally speaking, a pretty bad expansion because even though there were a lot of really cool cards, in my opinion, none of these cards really saw that much play, and if you looked at the meta, you can look at some of my tier list videos from when the expansion first came out. For the first like month or two, the top 4 of the top 6 decks were decks that were strong the year before. Even after a rotation where half of the cards were removed from standard and a whole new expansion came out, 4 of the decks that were strong the year before still dominated the meta after because of just this massive power difference between those cards. There wasn't really a reset. You look at a card like this Climactic Necrotic Explosion. This card is sick, but it will never see play. And yes, some of these cards are meant to be more of a meme, but it can't even have a chance to be a meme because you are not even getting to turn 10 most of the time. The power level in this game is so crazy that these cool, like kind of slower legendary cards or slower archetypes suck ass. Another example is Death Knight. The Plague Death Knight has been buffed, I think has had 5 or 6 buffs. Maybe it's only 5, but it's somewhere in that range. And it's still bottom tier because the game ends before they're even drawing like a single plague sometimes. And don't even get me started on game modes. I mean, I think the game modes is a point where like Blizzard was blinded by their own success. Battlegrounds was such a success story that they thought they could do no wrong. So they came out with duels, and as soon as that wasn't an immediate success, they were like, well, that didn't work, and they threw it away. Mercenaries was cool, had potential, but then they removed the best free-to-play option, and they ruined PvP, so that was also scrapped. Classic was actually just deleted from Hearthstone. It's not playable anymore, so anybody who made any Classic cards are out of luck. And Twist, yeah, it's literally it's designed to squeeze every little bit of value out of a customer because these cards are only going to be playable for a month. Like, rather than doing these things that you're not going to support or are predatory in nature and you're losing the trust of your player base, focus on the game modes that people actually care about. I mean, just look at the player base here that Zeddy put out as a tweet in terms of people who have hit Legend. On the American servers, it's almost 1,500 for both Standard and Wild. A little bit surprised about Wild, not gonna lie. But Twist, 50. He's not missing a 0, it's 50. Nobody wants to play this game mode in the nicest way possible because they realize that it is a predatory game mode, and Blizzard's probably gonna stop promoting it and supporting it in a month or 2 anyway. Rather than doing this, you should focus on the game modes that people really care about. For example, Wild. The fact that you've come out with an expansion for Wild and more consistent patch notes has been a godsend to the whole Wild community. It has made all of them so much happier. Yes, some cards in the expansion might be a little bit too broken, admittedly, and sometimes like metas arise that are kind of toxic. But people really love Wild. People really love Standard, and don't even get me started on Battlegrounds, which is probably bigger than both Standard and Wild combined at this point. Just focus on those. Spend your resources on those, and don't try to get your player base to spend resources on other game modes you're gonna stop supporting anyway. Like, it's so frustrating every time I hear about a new game mode in Hearthstone because I'm simultaneously excited and disappointed because I'm like, well, that's at least part of the team that's not gonna be working on Standard and Wild anymore, right? I don't know, I'm getting a little bit worked up about this because game modes, these new game modes have really pissed me off recently, but that's my 2 cents on it. Just, you have the groundwork of such a great game. Stop trying to go for too much. I don't exactly know what to say about it. It just feels like games don't have agency. Games are ending too fast. The cards they nerf aren't the correct ones. They favor certain cards and don't nerf them even if they are the problem. And the power level of the game is just too insane.